Hi, everyone. We're just going to wait a few more minutes, just so people can join, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Great. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Well, first of all, just want to say thank you for joining the webinar today. Welcome. My name is Eliza Thompson. I'm a researcher at Themis. As most of you know, Themis is a purpose-led digital anti-financial crime agency. A key part of our work is exploring financial crime risks across various industries, one of which being professional sports. I'm very excited to moderate the discussion today and delighted to be joined by such knowledgeable professionals as we look at financial crime risks across professional football and associated businesses. We also have a very international audience today, which is wonderful to see. So thank you all for taking the time out of your day. If not too touchy of a subject, I'm sure many of you tuned into the Champions League final last week. And with the Premier League schedule newly announced, no better time to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of football. From recent corruption charges against Barcelona related to the payment of a former referee to recent suspensions of players both in the UK and the US for unlawful sports gambling, it's really clear that financial crime in the sport isn't going away anytime soon. As we all know, football is one of the most popular sports in the world, with tournaments such as the World Cup viewed by billions of people. The industry is worth over $3 billion, and it's expected to surpass $4 billion by 2027. And while the vast majority of football business is legitimate, the sheer amount of money flowing through the market and across jurisdictions expose the industry to illicit actors seeking to profit from the dark side of the sport. So today we'll explore some of these varying financial crime risks, such as risks related to corruption, gambling, laundering of illicit assets. We'll also explore ways to mitigate these risks. So we hope to shine spotlight on the role of technology in helping ensure you are doing good, transparent business. So without further ado, I'm joined by my colleague, George, from our intelligence team, who is not only a football fan, but also has worked in the industry as well. I'm also excited to introduce our two other panelists, Katie Simmonds and Ennio Bovolenta. Katie joins us from the Sports Integrity Global Alliance, or SIGA for short, where she is the Global Chief Operating Officer. She is an English qualified lawyer that specializes in sports law, and she plays an integral part in the development and expansion of SIGA, which is the world's largest coalition for sports integrity. Katie is also the managing director of SIGA Women and leads a global mentorship program for aspiring female leaders in the industry to impact the number of women represented in the decision-making structures of sport organizations. So welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, great. Ennio is a lawyer by training with over 13 years of experience in sports law, having worked on a number of sports-related issues, including negotiation of commercial contracts and litigation before national and international sport judicial bodies. He joined FIFA in 2016 as legal counsel of the Players Status Department, and then was eventually promoted to the role of head of integrity, where he managed the team in charge of protecting integrity of football competitions worldwide. So welcome as well.
Thank you very much, Eliza.
Great. Well, I think as we all see, we have an overflowing wealth of knowledge on our panel today. So in terms of the running order, the next 35 minutes will take form of Q&A of our panelists, followed by 15 minutes of audience Q&A. So please, anytime you have a question, feel free to send it through on the Zoom Q&A panel on your screen. And then at the end as well, feel free to ask. But before we begin, we always like to set the stage with an initial question for the audience. So we'll have a poll that's going to pop up. So really a key kind of question is, what to you is the most pressing financial crime concern in football? So it should pop up on your screen, and then we'll give everyone about 10 seconds or so to answer. Great. And then I'm not sure. Yeah, and the poll. Great. So very clear winners, bribery and corruption. So about 36% said bribery, 41% corruption, and then the third most is tax evasion, 11%, followed by money laundering and sanction evasion, which I think is one that has been in the news a lot lately. So yeah, I think very clear kind of key ones we see all around. I think bribery and corruption, especially a lot of our research at Themis, really shows that. So great to kind of hear your guys' input. So I think turning that question onto you, Katie, would you be able to detail what the main financial crime risks facing football are that you've seen in your role in sports integrity? And then also it'd be great to hear just a little bit as well about SIGA's work.
Of course. Thank you, Eliza, and the wider Themis team for today's invitation to speak at this great webinar, which is on a very pertinent topic. And I think I will set the scene about SIGA, the Sport Integrity Global Alliance, for our international audience who may not be familiar with us, but you will soon. SIGA, actually in Portuguese and Spanish, and our global CEO is Portuguese, it actually means to go straight ahead. And that's exactly what we're doing with our reforms for sport and professional football across the industry. As you mentioned, Eliza, we are the largest and most influential global coalition in the field of sport integrity. We're independent, we're neutral, and we're actually funded by our members. We're multi-stakeholder, and we're a coalition that unites the entire sporting industry around enhanced governance standards for sports. And our members consist of sport, governments, international organisations, and global business, such as MasterCard, who's been one of our founding members from the very beginning, as well as civil society. And our purpose is clear. We are creating a new landscape for the sports industry through the adoption and implementation of the SIGA Universal Standards on Sport Integrity. And how we make this change is through our universal standards, and most significantly, our independent rating and verification system, which is designed to certify that sports organisations are not just fit for purpose, but they're worthy of the trust and investment from the sponsors, the broadcasters, the fans like ourselves, and ultimately the governments that also invest in sports. And we've got 4 universal standards on sport integrity. And obviously the one on financial integrity in sport is the one we're going to address today. But it's important to reference the others, which include good governance, sports betting integrity, and youth development and protection. And how this relates to football is that we created SIGA as a direct response to the unprecedented reputation crisis that hit football and the wider sport industry in 2014 and 2015 with the infamous FIFA Gate. And we believe that with SIGA, sport can earn the trust and restore its reputation. And that a sport, if free from corruption, should not be dictated by law enforcement, the courts, or actually even media investigations that have to date, when we think about what have been the biggest drivers in instigating cultural change, has actually been through some of the investigative journalism and the FBI and IRS storming FIFA. This has damaged the reputation of sport. So at SIGA, we are a positive effort to reform sport from within. And it was interesting to see those 8 potential topics, and with corruption and bribery, with the poll named as the first. And I would say that, you know, the threats that we've seen obviously include corruption, bribery, money laundering, tax evasion, but also opaque offshore structures that disguise who the ultimate beneficial owners are, corruption and manipulation of bidding process for the hosting of major sporting events, lack of effective, up-to-date club licensing systems with proper financial criteria, and match fixing, and even most recently, it hit the headlines in Portugal, the human trafficking of players. And all these topics, as we know, have hit the headlines for the wrong reasons in professional football. Football should be on the back pages, and it should be a beacon of light for the values of sport. And so we asked the sports organisations to adopt our standards and go through our rating system. We look forward to discussing more about the risks and our solutions throughout this webinar.
Yeah, great. Perfect overview to really set the tone for today. So I think one thing you mentioned was match fixing, which is a phenomenon that undermines credibility of football and is an issue I know that's on a lot of our minds. So Ennio, if you have kind of some insight on the incentives behind match fixing and the consequences it can have. I know we've discussed some, for instance, that it's more lower tier football clubs are more susceptible. So if you can kind of just go into detail a little bit.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Eliza, and thanks to you and to Themis for the invitation today. It's a pleasure to be here in this webinar with such distinguished guests and to address these very interesting topics. I mean, match fixing is indeed something I know, but before I start going into that, just let me make clear that I started after the FIFA Gate, so please don't raise questions to me about FIFA Gate, because this is the past also for FIFA. So it's not really, what I can say, what I saw was what FIFA did eventually, because it started in 2016, to restore its reputation and to comply with its statutory objective, which is to one of its statutory objectives, which is to protect and promote the integrity worldwide. So in my role before, until last year as head of integrity, I actually was to lead a department in charge of promoting and protecting integrity worldwide and addressing all the match fixing related issues. So when we refer to match fixing, I also prefer to refer to the definition contained in the most important international convention on match fixing, which is the Convention of the Council of Europe on the Manipulation of Sports Competition. And so when we refer to match fixing, we refer to an intentional agreement, act, or omission, which is directed at manipulating the result or even the course of a sports competition or a match in order to eliminate the unpredictable nature of the match and competition and obtain for the perpetrators an undue advantage. So which is the incentive? Which is the undue advantage? Can be twofold. Sometimes it's just a sporting advantage, which is a classic situation where basically two athletes, or maybe different teams, usually different teams, agree on having a specific result because it's convenient to both the teams involved. But most of the times, what I could see is there is often a financial undue advantage, because there are third parties interested in making use of the sports competition in order to obtain profits, illicit profits. Maybe these two incentives can be combined. Sometimes there are also other factors which is more uncommon, like, I don't know, the owner of a team is maybe an influential politician in the country, so he has interest in keeping his image a very high level, so manipulating the results of his team. But most of the time, there are international criminal syndicates behind match fixing, which need to get someone inside the sports competition. Can be an athlete, can be a referee, can be a managing director, a coach, can be anyone who has the power to manipulate the sports, the result or a part of the match. Can be this so-called spot fixing. So when you manipulate, I don't know, when you bet on having a yellow card in a certain moment of a match, that is also match fixing. So the incentive is typically of financial nature, because there is an organization behind. Which are the consequences? The consequences also here are twofold. First, the first kind of consequence is of criminal nature. Depending on the countries where the perpetrators are based, the applicable criminal law might entail the imposition of criminal sanctions. From my perspective, from the perspective of a sports organization, what I can say is that differently from the criminal law, where each country can or not provide sanctions for match fixing, and I can tell you that some countries do not have legislation on match fixing, sports rules always sanction match fixing. So for sure, the consequences will be always having sporting sanctions or those falling under sports jurisdiction. So FIFA, UEFA, sports federation cannot impose sanctions on criminals, but they can sanction indeed all those involved in sports who are subject to the sports regulations. And these sanctions can be really heavy and can arrive to the lifetime suspension or even really heavy fines.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That's really helpful in understanding more the root of such a pervasive issue that we've seen come up both in the news and also in our own research at Themis as well. In addition to match fixing, another thing that comes up often in our research is corruption, other forms of corruption, one of which being around lucrative media and marketing rights, given the considerable value associated with advertising in the football world. So George, I wonder whether you have seen a case of this that's particularly illustrative.
Thank you, Eliza, and Katie, Ennio. It's a pleasure to be with you all on today's panel today. I have a case here that I've mapped out using our due diligence tool, Themis Search, which hopefully you can all see. And as we'll all know, a huge way the football industry makes an income is through the commercialization of the media and marketing rights associated with football events and tournaments. The organizing entity, such as FIFA with respect to the World Cup, sell these rights to sports marketing companies who then sell these downstream to other entities, including TV networks and corporate sponsors. So last year's World Cup in Qatar, for example, generated over £1.2 billion in sponsorship revenue for FIFA. So clearly there's no lack of money flowing through the advertising space of the football industry, a characteristic that naturally makes it particularly susceptible to abuse by nefarious actors. So take this infamous case that I'm sure many of us are familiar with. And I just want to add that, Ennio, this was, of course, before you joined FIFA, but it must have been interesting to deal with the consequences that came from this scandal. So in 2015, a vast network, and I mean that quite literally, as you can see, of FIFA officials and corporate executives from around the world were indicted for charges that allege they engaged in fraud, bribery, and money laundering. The executives abused their senior positions in the football sector for personal gain, using their connections with sports marketing executives, such as Aaron Davidson, who you can see here, from Traffic Sports, who shut out competitors and kept incredibly valuable contracts for themselves through systematic payments of bribes and kickbacks. In total, the executives are alleged to have received $150 million worth of bribes in exchange for their support of the sports marketing executives. So it's this sort of behavior that so severely undermines the credibility of the sport. And as fans have become more engaged and informed about the activities on the sideline, it's more important than ever that clubs and their associated partners reflect the desire to restore football's integrity in all corners of the game. Let alone the harm done to the image of the sport in the eyes of fans, corruption on this scale has real-world implications for the young leagues and developing countries that should benefit from the revenue generated by the marketing rights that they hold.
Yeah, great. That's really interesting to see it so visually well represented as well. So really interesting case. Thanks. Katie, I think as this case demonstrates, it's quite clear that the risks you spoke about at the beginning are not to be underestimated in their scope. So why do you think we see financial crime manifested in so many aspects of the football sector? What really makes it an attractive industry for criminals and corruption?
So I was just unmuting myself. Yeah, I love the web. I think the web was really great visuals to see how football works and how the deals work and how the money flows and how that can really create this opacity, because that's really at the center of it. I'd say that football is probably a victim of its own success. I think you mentioned at the start of the webinar that the industry was worth 3 billion a year. But I would like to counter that because in 2015 to 2016, just when SIGA was about to be officially formed, we actually undertook a research project with Professor Matt Andrews of Harvard Kennedy School. And the direct revenue that he found back then was that it would attributed to 33 billion a year. And men's professional football is the biggest sport in the world, and that makes it susceptible to criminal infiltration. It also doesn't take into account, going back to what Ennio was discussing about sports betting, which is actually an industry worth an estimated 3 to 5 trillion US dollars. So I would say that the financial dimension of football, coupled with the fact that football is quite simply governed with outdated policies, we'd even go so far to say that sport is the last frontier that remains unregulated. We've had the media, the financial sector become regulated, but football has been left to be governed autonomously. And all those factors, the financial dimension, the factor relating to the fact that it's been governed and without much scrutiny, really creates the perfect cocktail or the perfect storm for organised crime and unscrupulous individuals to actually take advantage of the weaknesses in the system. So I'd like to make the point that football is not the perpetrator, it's the victim because of those factors that I mentioned. And that part of the issue is actually the governments have not effectively regulated financial systems to adequately pierce the corporate veil of offshore structures and investment funds that operate with little oversight. And this is why, going back to why Themis exists, really, due diligence is so important when it comes to knowing who you are doing business with and to check that the financial flows are clean. Other factors which are actually really specific to European football that make it vulnerable is this big discrepancy with what I term the haves and the have-not clubs, because clearly the financial sustainability of football is an important factor, as it is like no other industry where the vast majority of the clubs are actually operating bank sheet insolvent. And there is this correlation between how much you spend on the pitch to whether you are the team that lifts that trophy. And obviously, if you lift up that trophy, you get all of the media rights and extra money and revenue. So, whilst we think that football is a very rich sport, which it is, but it is actually dominated by a small number of elite clubs at the tops and players and owners. And then there's thousands of clubs beyond this elite that have very little resources, constituting a vast base of what I call the have-nots in actually football's financial pyramid, which creates pressure on those that are not part of the elite. And that is where vulnerabilities like match fixing comes into play, because not every footballer is the Ronaldo commanding the top salaries in the Saudi league. I saw that was one of the questions in the chat. But this is why we're calling for a united front, why we have the SIGA Universal Standards on Serves to instigate cultural change by bringing the government's global business and sport together to bring about accountability through our independent audit systems. And we believe that we do have the solutions, and we're looking for those trailblazers, which I'll talk about later.
Yeah, great. Super, super great points. I think especially the lack of regulation and the role governments should be playing, and the fact that, they really need to step up in this regard, I think is really valuable. Great. So I think now we'll do another audience poll. I think it's always great to hear directly from the audience. So with these risks in mind, what we've discussed so far would be interesting to get an idea as to what you all think are the most damaging consequences of a football-related organization not doing proper due diligence and potentially ending up linked to a financial crime, either knowingly or unknowingly. So again, we'll give a few seconds for everyone to put their input. Great. Okay, I think we can go ahead and close. Great. So really interesting. Kind of the key one highlighted most is adverse media reputational damage, which I think we all know working in this realm is very important. You know, I think people don't forget easily when you're kind of plastered in the news. Secondary legal action, enforcement, participation, operating bans, again, those, you know, kind of the actual more legal side of a lot of consequences. And then finally, financial costs to investors pulling out was another key one found. So really interesting, kind of seeing the multi effects that can happen. So great to hear from you all. So I think now, kind of going on this, as we see, there are many reasons industry leaders should be doing due diligence, the impact it can have directly on businesses, clubs, third parties. So I think, Ennio, it would be great to hear your take on this. So why is it so important for football clubs and their associates, such as banks, lawyers, accountants? Why should they be doing rigorous due diligence checks? What are the consequences if they fail to do so?
Well, this is a very interesting topic. Also the poll, I think, is touched upon on different aspects. But in my opinion, the underlying thing that we have to bear in mind is that all those interacting with the football, so-called football industry, have a direct or an indirect interest in keeping this industry clean. So in keeping sports clean. I'm saying this because if you think what would happen if the outcome of a sports competition would be predictable, what would be the consequence? The consequence would be that, first of all, it would lose the inner feature of sports, which is the unpredictability of the result. So the attendance would not be interested anymore. The value of the product would definitely fall, as well as the value of the all correlated contracts. Let's think about, I don't know, tickets revenues, media rights, sponsorship value. The product would not be interesting anymore, because this is what everybody loves about football and like sports in general. I can naturally refer to football because it's the probably is the most popular sport on earth in terms of also betting turnover. And I know it is not the only factor, but if you check the betting turnover, more than half of the betting turnover worldwide is on football solely. So this is a clear element indicating which is the dimension of the sport. The most viewed sports events in the world is the FIFA World Cup final. So these are numbers, and naturally, if those watching football match would lose the appeal for football because they know that it is corrupted, it is not. It is basically is already predetermined in advance its outcome. All the industry would fall. So this is just it's more a consideration for for those, for lawyers, for those working in banking and so on. If you look at it with the perspective of a football fan, this would be even worse because there is a lot of passion behind. So this would be, and what the mostly it's easy to lose in reputation in just one episode, but it takes a decade sometimes to restore it. So going back to that poll, I think that the reputational effects and the damage to the image of a sport in general is indeed the worst thing. And so this is why it's in the interest of all the actors involved in football, directly and indirectly, in keeping it safe and protect its integrity. So I think that that's a crucial thing that not only the players, but also those working in football and with football have always to keep in mind.
Yeah, those are great points. I think we agree a lot of what we focus on at Themis is adverse media and really, the reputational side of things and how it can have such a massive impact, not just on one organization, but on the whole sector as well. Great. So I think going off that, George, it's quite clear that due diligence is necessary to protect clubs and other businesses from the risks we've discussed and for the reasons we've discussed. But I think it'd be interesting to learn about a case where some of these checks were not completed and then the consequences that had for the football club to really put more into context what happens if you fail to do so. So if you could talk us through one.
Yeah, absolutely. So going to bring up another risk map here. And for our most avid football fans with us, you might recognize some of these names that you're seeing on the screen. But these are all executive members of the Italian football club Juventus. But what else do they have in common? Well, all of these individuals that you're seeing resigned from the board of Juventus in November 2022 for alleged false accounting and market manipulation. The case centres on the club's activities during the COVID pandemic between May and June 2020, where 23 players signed agreements that were to see their salaries cut in order to reduce the costs for the club during the financial instability caused by the pandemic. The Juventus players were meant to waive 4 months' worth of wages, but the investigation alleges that they gave up just 1 month worth of wages. So the accusation against the club therefore suggests that the players were paid in the black, allowing the players and club to avoid taxes. The statements, however, were allegedly falsified to make it seem that the books had been balanced. The investigation is still ongoing, but the future for Juventus doesn't look too rosy. Already, the entire board of the team has had to resign. Players that are found to have been complicit might face bans, and the risk of sporting sanctions might threaten the club's spot in future tournaments, which I think, as Katie mentioned earlier, is so valuable to the clubs. And given the financial bind that Juventus has been in for a while, reporting losses of 254 million euros in September of last year, the prospect of facing major fines and being cut off from the revenue and brand deals that come with major sporting events will obviously be a major loss for the club. Without a doubt, the legal, financial, and reputational costs of a scandal such as this further underscores the importance of going just that one step further to vet your partners so you don't risk forming relationships with people you simply don't want to form relationships with. It also points to the value of football clubs and associated industries putting in place strong anti-financial crime governance systems and policies to ensure that they're not caught in the crossfire that results from poor decisions.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I think, as always, we see the power of case studies, really getting at the details. So now that we've laid out the risks that the football industry can be exposed to, I think it'd only be right for us to turn to some of the great work being done to combat financial crime in the sport. So I think there's been a lot of progress being done across the industry. Katie, your organization seeks to drive integrity in the sports industry, keep sports free of illicit and financial crime. So what are some of the most significant changes that you've seen help increase integrity? How has the industry really started to mitigate financial crime risks?
Well, from a personal perspective, I've been working with our global CEO, and shout out to Emmanuel. I know he's watching. He's been sending me some WhatsApp messages. But we have found that
really from us putting together what SIGA is as a solution for the sports industry. When we went to some of the sports 7 years ago, many didn't think they had an issue on sports betting. Many didn't think that they had an issue on bribery or corruption. And now, 7 years later, we've got roles like Ennio was just in, head of integrity, chief compliance officers. And this gives us confidence that sports integrity is now being placed more seriously, because quite simply, it influences in terms of the sponsorship revenue. If there's reputational damage, there'll be more and more increasing pressure from the sponsors to make sure that what their investment and what they're investing in is safe and secure. And that's exactly why I was and our CEO were in Brazil last week, where we met with over 50 global sponsors who are all saying to the Brazilian sports industry, unless you reach SIGA's bronze standard, which is very high, by the way, it's 70%, we won't be investing. And they're going to give the sports 3 years in order to close the gap to meet those standards. So I think, first of all, the poll reaction by the audience was absolutely spot on. But second of all, that's why SIGA exists, to bring this coalition together, because quite frankly, we don't want to be seeing sport in the front pages. We want it in the back pages. From the work that we're doing on the ground, I don't think enough is being done to mitigate the opportunity for abuse. Reform is very slow. This is why term limits are important at the top. You don't want to see the same leader perpetuate power for 20 years or so. And that's why SIGA was created and exists, to push for long overdue governance reforms. It's not just on the financial integrity side. The good governance is the bedrock. And we want to positively harness the pressure from the sponsors, the broadcasters, the governments, everybody tuned in today to influence that change. Because without all sides of the industry coming together, sport will not win the war on criminal infiltration, and football won't either. We do this through a positive and collaborative tone. You won't hear myself or our global CEO or any of us at SIGA speaking about sport from a negative perspective, because we focus on the solutions and we invite the sports to go on a governance journey with us. The most significant changes are actually advocated by our universal standards on sport integrity. And we're working with sports organizations to adopt those standards and to go through our independent rating system, because it's all about bringing that scrutiny, that oversight. It is radical. We call it tranquil evolution, not evolution, tranquil revolution. And this is we want sport to obviously govern itself autonomously, but to go through SERVs, which offers a tool in order to ensure that independent oversight. Because to date, only self-assessment tools exist, which is the equivalent of looking at yourself in the mirror and saying how great you are, whether this is somebody else assessing to see what your process and practices are, and how well informed your whole employees are on those processes and practices, to build that whole culture of integrity. Just to add that the SIGA Universal Standards are based on corporate best practice. They were specifically tailored to the sports industry to respond to specific problems and meet the specific challenges. They are applicable to all sports from all countries and all sizes. And our global platform unites the industry around the principle that better governance, due diligence, transparency, quite simply equals better business. And they are in bronze, silver, and gold. They're incremental. And we've developed a whole program that provides education on SERVs, to also offering an independent gap assessment audit before you go through the certification process. So you can make sure that your organization scores the best possible outcome. Just on the football side, I would add that one of the most significant reforms contained in our universal standards on financial integrity actually relates to a clearinghouse, which is to ensure financial integrity and transparency related transactions with domestic and international athletes transfers and club ownership. Club ownership was also mentioned in the questions, and we'll go on to that shortly. But this mechanism has been developed and spoke for the last 20 years, advocated by our global CEO, who was in a prime situation, given that he was the CEO of the European and World Leagues Association. So he knows the reality better than most people. And we believe that the clearinghouse is the silver bullet and the gold standard for football that will close the gap that makes the industry susceptible to money laundering and tax evasion. It's important that on a global scale, that the financial transactions, that we know where the money's going from and where the money's going to. So we have, hot off the press, we've got League of Portugal going through our rating system. They're the first European football league to go through, and we are in very close dialogue with our partner, UEFA. Our global CEO recently chaired the UEFA Convention on the Future of Football in Europe. And we look forward to working independently with a range of football entities. The SERV system can rate clubs, it can rate leagues, and that will then prevent and almost be used as an insurance policy for the sponsors and the governments that give public funding, that degree of certainty that the processes and procedures are being followed to the highest standards, which we own the IP of, and that we can evolve as best practice evolves. There is no such thing as this independent rating system. It's been developed for the industry, tailored for the industry, and it's designed to protect the industry that we all love in a positive, spirited way, so that we don't actually see cases like Juventus happen, which damage not only the club's brand, but the football across the entire industry, and prevent more financial investment. So I think we're ready for some questions after all that, but looking forward to the next stage in the webinar.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, so I think for a final question, keeping in this theme, Ennio, FIFA has itself faced challenges with respect to financial crime in the football industry. In response to these challenges, FIFA has developed great programming, such as the Global Integrity Program, in collaboration with the UN, a project that you managed. It seems that across the board, integrity is a word we keep on hearing, with professionals trying to reassert integrity across the industry. So I think it'd be worthwhile to hear on your perspective what professionals across the sector can do to really start restoring a lot of integrity in the football sector.
Well, I think that the key for obtaining this objective is to put a lot of effort in awareness raising and cooperation among all the stakeholders involved. In this sense, I listened carefully to what Katie was saying, and I can only praise the remarkable contribution that organizations like SIGA are giving to the mission of promoting and protecting the integrity of football. I can only recall that these are also statutory objectives of FIFA, and also of the other sports football confederations and member associations of FIFA. But this goes also for the other international sports federation which are trying to pursue the very same goals. When I refer to awareness raising, yes, awareness raising is sometimes a bit it's a broad concept, but when I was at FIFA, at least in this Global Integrity Program, the goal was to ensure that each and every of the 211 member association of FIFA had at the end of this education program a so-called integrity officer, so a person dedicated full-time on pursuing the objective of promoting integrity in his jurisdiction, her jurisdiction, and protecting it. So this means conducting programs on the ground, implementing preventive measures before football competition take place, and eventually conducting investigations on cases of match fixing. So it was really an ambitious objective. But I can say that before we started this program in collaboration with the United Nations Agency Office on Drugs and Crime, the UNODC, not all the football associations had an integrity officer, and in the end, after this program, which was concluded last year, this objective was concluded. Naturally, in certain part of the world, there is a higher sensibility, there is a lot of attention to awareness raising, like I can say, for instance, in Europe, you had already an integrity officer in every football associations, but for the rest of the world was not the case. I can tell you really by heart. So awareness raising not only on the football associations, but also going to the grassroots levels. So is it vital to educate the young athletes of tomorrow? And this is the mission of each sports federation, to ensure that they are really aware of the risks of their profession, of their future, because what we could witness as FIFA is that the younger the athletes are, the more exposed they are to the risk of being targeted by match fixers. So this is very important to act on the ground. But also it's important to spread a culture of protecting integrity and in order to avoid not only match fixing, which is a form of corruption, but against corruption in general. And for achieving this result, it is very important cooperation, because sports organizations, they have an audience which is, yes, it goes beyond those involved in football or in sports, but they cannot reach out to anyone. So it's very important that there is cooperation with other international organizations, stakeholders who can help the sports organization in reaching this objective, in ensuring, for instance, that in every single country of the world there is a legislation sanctioning match fixing, so which is not the case still today. So these efforts can be reached combining the efforts with international organizations. So I mentioned the UNODC before, which is one of these organizations. I mentioned SIGA. There is I can refer to other organizations with which my role as head of integrity, but my department, we cooperated in the past, and I guess they are still cooperating right now, like the Council of Europe, which is very active. I recall the Immaculate Convention before, but also those organizations who have the coercive powers for conducting investigations beyond the sports jurisdiction. So I refer to the police organizations. So in Switzerland, there is the FEDPOL, which is cooperating with the federations based in Switzerland, but internationally in Europe, there is Europol. In the international level, there is Interpol. All these entities, they really need to cooperate because they can really achieve incredible results also by conducting investigations. Other stakeholders in the sports, in this industry, I can mention the betting regulators at national and international level. I can mention the lotteries. We cooperated with the national authorities, but also with the international organizations like nowadays is ULIS, which is the International Association of Lotteries. So there's really an environment full of stakeholders which can really play an active role cooperating together, not only for promoting an integrity culture at all levels, from grassroots level to the level of the executives, of those working around sports, but also in general for conducting investigations and exchanging information, because we can promote everything we want, but if we do not eventually we do not conduct investigations and impose sanctions, the system is not closed. So we need to close the system. So it's also the part of imposing sanctions on the perpetrators is fundamental. And this is even more another part of the story, which makes it fundamental to have a cooperation between the police, the betting regulators, and the sports organizations which have the power to impose sporting sanctions.
Yeah, great. Definitely agree with all those excellent points. I think now we can turn to audience Q&A. But first, thank you guys all. That was an excellent discussion. So I think we'll start off with some of the ones that are in the chat, and then if we have time, people can raise their hand as well. But for the first question from Ravi, it's third-party ownership has been around for decades and is a key area for bribery and corruption that feeds into players' ownership, especially in South America, jurisdictions whereby issues arise on image rights. Stringent procedures need to be implemented by football clubs to mitigate such ownership types. Do you agree? So I don't know if one of the panelists would want to take this one, but
I can have a go.
So thanks for the question. I think third-party ownership of players has now also migrated to third-party ownership of clubs. Totally agree that stringent procedures need to be implemented by football clubs, but also by the governing bodies as well, to make sure when with the owners and directors test, because which they have in the UK under the Premier League. And that's actually one of our universal standards of financial integrity and transparency. It's all about knowing the ultimate beneficial owner. And obviously, the more opaque the structure, the more diluted it is. We don't know who's reaching the money, and that also inflates the transfer costs. So yeah, absolutely agree. I'm sure Ennio's got a couple of additions on that topic as well.
Well, I think that when we refer to the third-party ownership, I can say that they are already forbidden according to FIFA regulations. So this is not tolerated to have external when we refer to the transfer of players, to have external third parties which can detain an interest in the future transfer of the player. I know that in South America, this was in particular very important topic, because there are so-called funds trying to detain, to own shares on the football players. But the FIFA intervened already some years ago with its regulations on that. When we refer to football clubs, if we refer to another issue of having same ownership for different football clubs, this is also an interesting topic. In this case, there are already stringent regulations also at the continental level, limiting at national level, limiting the possibility for the same company to detain multiple clubs, because this can be an incentive for conducting illicit operations. We saw some cases in Europe already, and I think that the trend for the future is indeed to limit as much as possible for the same property to own multiple clubs at the same time, because this naturally could determine financial infringements, in my opinion. But indeed, also at sports level, this could really risk to jeopardize the competition as a whole if two clubs belong to the same owner within the same competition.
Yeah, great. And I think going off that, kind of keeping in that theme, another question from the audience, Toby, says, you rightly mentioned the importance of external scrutiny, accountability, and while we've seen steps taken at the national level, and as you said, organizational league level and such, but it's really difficult maybe to get more coordination across international. So how can we introduce coordinated accountability and oversight really more at an international scale? So I don't know if either of you kind of have thoughts in terms of maybe how to increase coordination.
Yeah, I can go. Do you want to go first, Ennio, as I went first last time?
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to go through the question at the moment.
Okay.
So feel free to start. I don't mind.
Okay, I'll Toby, thanks for the question. This actually question goes to at the very center of why SIGA was created. It's a global coalition pushing for change. So how can we introduce coordinated accountability? I would say two ways, and that's why we're a multi-stakeholder coalition. One, we need to put the positive pressure from the sponsors. The ultimate aim of SIGA is to create a platform with the sponsors, so that the sponsors will join together and unite, and will not put their sponsorship money into sports that are not minimum bronze level serves rated, because that would then create this level playing field among the sponsors and ensure that all the sports that want the investment would have to raise their standards. And we are working with various sponsors. MasterCard, our member, is leading this initiative and asking for other sponsors to join us. And as I mentioned, Brazil are also there. There's a big community of sponsors there who want this to protect their investments. They've seen the presidents of the former National Olympic Committee in Brazil be arrested and put into prison. Obviously, that does nothing for their brand. And as the poll mentioned, their reputation was tarnished because of that. So that's the first positive pressure and how SIGA as a coalition unites. And the second one is the governments. We need the governments to also say and gather together, we've got the rating system, we've got the tools, we've got the solutions. We will not give public funding unless you go through the SIGA universal standards and of minimum bronze level. If we can get these two things fixed, it would raise the standards across the world. And standard setting and rating systems, they are not unique. The difference is they are unique to the sports industry to be universal. And that's the project I've been working on. So Toby, feel free to contact me on LinkedIn if you need any more information on that. And then I'll pass to Ennio.
Thank you very much, Katie. Well, yeah, it's a very interesting topic, and also this your proposal indeed can be a key for achieving this objective. I understand how it's difficult to introduce this mechanism for international sports federations, in particular if I think about FIFA. You know, if it's a national federation is one thing, but when we go at the top of the so-called sports pyramid, so which is national federation, continental confederations, and then eventually the top international sports federations, then what do you have above to ensure that to make an entity accountable, a sports federation accountable? So FIFA can naturally, in case, put pressure on its confederation on the member association, but who can put pressure on FIFA? What's beyond the FIFA? I mean, I refer to FIFA, but this can be applied to any international sports federation. They all work the same. The sports pyramid is the same everywhere. What do you have above? There is the IOC, the International Olympic Committee. That's the ultimate instance. So I want to believe that it is without making for sponsors necessary to put pressure on the international sports federations. I want to believe that international sports federations can make themselves accountable. But I think that a strong pressure can be put in case by the International Committee as the IOC as the ultimate instance, which has the function of protecting the integrity of sports in general for all the sports. But otherwise, I think that the role of initiatives like those mentioned by Katie can do a really good job in this sense. And also, I remember that there are also already international organizations like the Association of Summer Olympics, as if the International Organization of Summer Olympic Sports, which is conducting this kind of similar initiatives, and there are also other organizations going in this direction. So I know it's difficult to oblige an international sports federation to pursue a certain objective, but I think that the pressure can be put by initiatives from the sponsors, and in the ultimate instance by external organizations, or from the top, from the IOC. They can also contribute to achieve this objective.
Just to build off what Ennio said, just as I know we're running out of time, but I would like to emphasize that independent assessment is absolutely imperative. ASWOF has self-assessment. It's a brilliant first step. But unless you have an independent assessment and certification, we don't think that that will progress. And I do think that having pioneers, sports organisations like Liga Portugal, like the International Chess Federation that are our members, like Rugby League, like hopefully World Rugby, also UEFA, those pioneers coming together will really make the other sports look around and say, well, I can see the benefits of being certified. It's showing that you are doing the right thing, and that you are, why wouldn't you want to showcase that what your values are on the pitch is mirrored off the pitch? And it's about going on, as I mentioned, that governance journey.
Yeah, great. Those are both excellent points. I think also today, for instance, really just having these discussions across international audiences and across organizations, really important. I think, as we all know, really trying to get to the heart of a lot of these issues, and coordination is key. So yeah, I think on that note, we're out of time. So thank you all for joining. Thanks to our excellent panel for the great discussion. Thanks to the audience for the questions. I know we didn't get to all of them today, but if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any member of the Themis team, and look out for post-event materials as well, and have a great rest of your day. So thank you all. Yeah, on that note, thank you again to our panelists.
Thank you, Eliza. Great to be with you, George and Ennio.
Very much. Thanks, everyone.
Likewise. Thank you very much to you all. It was a pleasure.